Hello and welcome to the Car Care and Reviews channel, and welcome to the 2023 Volvo V60 Cross Country B5 all-wheel drive wagon. Volvo and wagons have a long history. I mean, there was a time where they were so popular, they were so good, back in the 80s and 90s, and even before that, even a little bit after that. But now in 2023, we have this. The V60. Although wagons are kind of a dying breed because SUVs are taking over, but still we have this wagon. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at the V60, see what's good about it, what's not good about it. We're going to heavily focus on the technical details under the hood, underneath it, and we're going to take a look at the inside, outside, and everything in between right after this. Let's start our technical review under the hood with the engine. This is the B42.0T2 4-cylinder 2-liter turbocharged engine. There is a lot to be said about this engine, and the first thing is it is very busy. When you look under the hood, things are not very 4-cylinder-like. I mean, this is a big engine bay and it's extremely busy. Let's dive in and you'll know why it is extremely busy. Let's start with the mechanical construction of this engine. So the valve cover is an aluminum valve cover because this engine actually is a little bit on the older side of things. But what's interesting about it is, and this is a design, I know at least Mercedes-Benz uses it, possibly others use it as well. So there's no cam caps here. Usually, you pull the valve cover, cams are held in with cam caps. This engine doesn't have that. And the valve cover acts actually as the upper cam cap. So when you pull the valve cover, you also pull the caps. They do that for supposed compactness because this engine is massive for even this car that is massive as well. But moving on from that, this is a timing belt engine. Pretty interesting thing to see in 2023. The valve train is dual variable valve timing. They're both oil controlled. Very simple location of the solenoids that control the variable valve timing, just right on top of the valve cover. And then the valve train, this has hydraulic lifters, does have roller rockers as well. Pretty simple design that has been used in a lot of manufacturers successfully. Then we move into the drive belts, which is this is where things start to get very strange if the valve cover that has cam caps is not strange enough. So this engine has two drive belts. One of them goes from the crank to the AC compressor to the 48 volt motor. We're going to talk about the 48 volt system in details a little bit later in the video. But then the second belt drives the water pump, which is external, not driven by the timing belt, which is good. But here's a strange thing. The second belt is not driven from the crank to the water pump. It is driven from the AC compressor to the water pump. So if your main belt goes out, you not only have no compressor and no 48 volt system, and you have no water pump as well. So I don't know why there's two belts. Could have been just done with one, but that's how the Volvo deemed it good. And the other thing about this belt is the second little belt for the water pump. It is a stretch belt, our least favorite kind of belts. Moving on from that, this is a turbocharged engine. So medium size to a little bit on the smaller side turbo. You don't really feel lag with this turbo. It is sitting in the back, which is not the best idea in the planet, having the turbo all the way in the back. If you need to access it, access is difficult. In the front is better, but that's how they did it. It is coolant and oil cooled. It does have an electronic wastegate, and this one does have a liquid to air intercooler. That intercooler lives in the intake manifold, makes the piping very compact, although compact is not a thing here because things are extremely busy here. Now this engine has a balance shaft because it is a 4-cylinder. It is bolted directly to the crankcase. It does have a single piece oil pan, which is nice, just keeps things simple. The fuel system here is pretty interesting. So this is direct injected, and the injectors are not on the side of the cylinder head like many other cars. They are on top, just like BMW's B58, for example. They sit right next to the ignition coils, removing the valve cover, on top of it being the cam caps as well, making it extremely difficult because now you have to pull all the injectors, replace all the seals, and this adds a lot of complication just for the sake of having them at the top. But what's even worse than that, see, most cars with direct injection, they'll have a high pressure fuel pump that takes that fuel that comes from the other smaller fuel pump in the tank to the front, pressurizes it to a very high as 3,000 psi, and that's how the direct injection system works. But in this car, it is not sitting where it is in 90% of cars, right on top of the valve cover driven by the camshaft. No, they went to unbelievable lengths just to make it different. So the fuel pump sits underneath the intake manifold and it is driven directly by the crank. And I don't understand the benefit of that, because now if you need to replace that little fuel pump, you have to remove half the stuff. You have to remove the intake manifold, drain the intercooler coolant, and do all this massive mess just to get to a little fuel pump, which could have sat on the valve cover, would have been much better. Let's talk about the cooling system, which this engine has two cooling systems. One of them is for the engine, one of them is for the intercooler. Let's talk about them in detail. So this engine has a mechanical water pump, the one we talked about with the strange belt, but it also has an auxiliary water pump, electric, in case there is a start-stop event in cold weather, so you can have that coolant continue to circulate and you wouldn't lose heat inside. But the interesting thing about this cooling system is this. Most modern cars will have a coolant distribution valve that can block coolant to the heater, block coolant to the engine, so they would make their warm-up time quicker. Usually, in 99% of manufacturers, they use a similar system. It is one block of valves that can distribute coolant where it needs to go. Very compact, very nice, and life is good. Not here though. Here they decided to put multiple valves in multiple locations to block coolant from certain places, which makes the coolant piping extremely complicated and extremely unnecessary. They could have compacted all this into one valve and engineered it a little bit better, but that's not what they did here. It almost feels like an afterthought and something they added later, and adds to the mega complication of coolant hoses all over the place. And then the second cooling system is pretty simple. It is for the intercooler. It is separate than the main cooling system, uses the same coolant, does have its own electric water pump, does have its own completely separate radiator in the front, it's not to the side. So basically in the front you have the main engine radiator, second radiator for the intercooler circuit, then the condenser for the AC system. Then the last thing mechanical we're going to talk about here is the oil pump. The engine oil pump, which is a very, very strange orientation here. So we talked about this engine having a timing belt. So the oil pump, instead of it being just driven by the crank or driven by the balance shaft directly gear to gear, it is the opposite of simple. Best way to put it. So here's what they did. The balance shaft has a little gear that sticks out of it, a little shaft, and then that shaft has a gear. Then from that gear, there is another timing chain, or a chain, that goes to another little sprocket that spins the oil pump. I don't know why we needed to add all this complication just to spin an oil pump. I don't recall any engine having issues of placement of an oil pump. Could be driven by the crank, could be driven by the nose of the crank if it's put in the front timing cover. Can't do that here because it's a timing belt engine, but there's better ways to do that than add a chain. So this engine has a timing belt and a chain. And then this is, of course, a 48 volt system, which, small statement off topic, I am yet to see a 48 volt system from all the cars that we've reviewed that has it, that actually works well and adds true value for the complication that it adds. I am open and objective and always willing to try out systems that are well and working, but I'm yet to find that. This is a 48 volt system. So here's how things are constructed and how they work. The idea here is when you have a start-stop event, you have more voltage and you can shut off the engine for an extended period of time and you have a quick startup. And at the same time, you can boost the engine when needed to give it a little bit more power. But the way they did it here is extremely interesting. So where the alternator normally sits in every single engine, you have the 48 volt motor, which is basically a giant expensive alternator. What this does is, it's a motor. If you spin it, it generates. If you apply power to it, it spins. That's very simple operation of a motor. So that motor starts the engine. That's the first thing that it does. And the way it starts the engine is not via gear-to-gear drive, or it sits between the engine and transmission. No, it's just an alternator. So it does that by using the drive belt. So the drive belt is almost looks like a timing belt or something extremely heavy duty, and it has an extremely heavy duty and super complicated tensioner, because that's what starts the engine, and that's how it boosts. And when the engine starts, it starts spinning that alternator, which now generates 48 volts. But wait, we don't have an alternator here. How are we going to charge our 12-volt battery, and how are we going to supply power to the whole car? Here's where things get more complicated. Somewhere in this area of the engine bay, there is a DC to DC converter, which basically takes that 48 volts, drops it down to 12, charges the battery, power the accessories and everything else. But then, because it is a DC to DC converter, it needs its own cooling, not a separate system. It does use the engine cooling, so you have coolant going to it and out of it. So there is even more cooling hoses and routing and everything, and one more component to worry about that accomplishes absolutely nothing. The thing about this system is, it is not the fully intrusive ones that have the motors sit between the engine and transmission, and it doesn't have a torque converter. No, talk about the transmission in a bit here. So driving wise, it is not as intrusive. It doesn't have the huge delays that such system would have if it was between the engine and trans, but still, there's something very interesting here. If you're driving normally, there's not huge delays, but if you're all of a sudden kind of abrupt acceleration, there's a huge delay, which is unexplainable because there shouldn't be a delay. This is a torque converter engine with a very rapid start system of the engine. The start-stop operation, though, when the engine shuts off and when it starts, it is seamless. It is much faster than, say, a high reduction starter that starts very quickly. It is smoother, and that has to be said. Let's talk about the transmission, which is something that's very interesting about Volvo. So this is an 8-speed transmission, torque converter, nothing really about it special. It does have a mechanical oil pump and an electric one, so when you have those start-stop events, you still have pressure, so when you take off, the transmissions already have pressure and the gears shifts won't be lost. But this transmission is made by Aisin. It's an 8-speed transmission from Aisin. Basically, a version of this transmission can be found in your Toyota Highlander, Toyota Sienna, Toyota Camry, Toyota Avalon, Lexus RX, and the list goes on and on. This is actually a very good transmission. In the early years of inception, it's really difficult for me to identify those years for Volvo because their production is different than Toyota line. But at the beginning of the production of this transmission, they did have some issues with the final drive. Things were resolved, and this transmission is actually pretty reliable if you take care of it. But it's kind of a surprise to see a Japanese transmission in a Swedish car. That I didn't think I would see in my lifetime, but here we are. And before we wrap up our technical review under the hood, I will say one thing. Reliability is a huge question mark because of the complication. There are so many things that are overcomplicated. There's so much plastic components and coolant hoses, and things are extremely complicated, where if you show up to your friendly gas station mechanic, he's going to take one good look at this and be like, I don't want this in my life. That's how this car impression is. For me as a mechanic, just looking at this, this is extremely overcomplicated for nothing, for lack of a better word. And the other thing is, even if the system turns out to be reliable long term, maintenance and repair costs will be very high. So that is something you want to keep in mind going into a system like this. Let's take a look at the underneath of the 23 Volvo V60. Starting in the front, everything is covered up. You notice this one is a Swedish car, so you don't have easy access to your oil change. You have to remove this entire cover. That's just how they do things. Let's take a look at the front suspension here, because this is a pretty interesting suspension. This is a front-wheel drive biased car. So the engine is orientated like a front-wheel drive car, but the suspension is that of a rear-wheel drive car. Notice lower control arm, then this is kind of a double wishbone design. If you look all the way up at the control arm, it is a single control arm at the top, and then you have the strut sitting on this bracket that connects to the lower control arm. Ball joint is part of the control arm. Unfortunately, it is not separate, but you can detach it from the knuckle here. This is pretty interesting. Everything here is aluminum, including the knuckle, including the bearing that will weld itself here in the future for the similar metals. Single piston caliper, which is somewhat of a large caliper. This looks huge and the pad is very large. Axle goes through it. Things are pretty standard here. You have sway bar and everything else. As we walk our way back, you notice something very interesting. The exhaust is right in the middle of the car. Usually you don't see that with all-wheel drive cars. It'll be a little bit to the side, but this one, the exhaust is right in the middle and really makes the tunnel very deep, and we'll look at that when we look inside the car. There's a lot of heavy shielding here, and it does feel like good quality shielding, like heat shielding here. Pretty interesting to see that. And then the drive shaft is all the way on top of the exhaust. And there's something interesting about this drive shaft. It has two center support bearings, not one. I don't remember the last car that had two. You see one of them is here, right in this area. And then you follow that down, there's another one here, then it goes into the differential. I don't know why. I mean, this is not an extremely long car. You'll see some big SUVs with a single. This one has two. Then we go all the way in the back. And this is where things get interesting. So there's this little contraption on the drive shaft, which I don't know exactly what it does. It's a flex joint. It's a very strange looking one. And then this is the rear differential. This has a very basic all-wheel drive. So the transfer case is mechanical. It's always spinning. This is a coupler motor that engages or disengages all-wheel drive. Then this cute little differential on the back with extra cute little axles coming out of it. This is not really meant for anything heavy duty or anything, even though they have an off-road mode, but this is not something you're going to push on hard. This is meant for really driving, snow driving, light off-roading, but nothing more than that. Then we look at the rear suspension, which there is actually a huge surprise here. You notice there's this very big aluminum control arm, and there's a little control arm here, a few control arms at the top, and the shock. But you notice the gleaming absence of a spring. There's no coil springs in the back. And that is because this car has a single leaf spring. You notice it right here, connected to the control arm. And no, it is not plastic. It is covered. I don't think this would be plastic. This would be a horrible idea if it was plastic. And then it comes out here. This is the spring. This has a leaf spring in the back. Kind of a throwback to old days, but we have a leaf spring in 2023 in a non-truck. It's just how Volvo deemed things. And then the exhaust, you have this giant muffler right here with a cutout valve. So it can close this side of the muffler or open it. Pretty interesting, but then there's a few Volvo specials. There's this opening right here that I really looked very hard to understand what exactly that does. A tow hitch maybe installed here and it comes out, but it's just a giant opening in the bumper. And then there is a lot of open space. If you look all the way up here, charcoal canister for the evap system is here. That's a pretty open spot where debris and everything can get to it. Wish this was a little bit better covered up. Same thing here, it's just wide open. There's no real coverings on the side, which is pretty interesting. Let's talk about the exterior of the V60. And the first impression when you see this car, it is a very good looking car. And it follows a very simple recipe. Less is more. It doesn't have extremely complicated body panels and very sweeping front and whatnot. It's a very simple yet elegant look. I really like how this thing looks. Wagon or not, it just looks good. Small grille, nothing over the top. The Volvo badge does have the radar sensor behind it for adaptive cruise control, which is something the automotive industry has been doing for a while now. Great location for it. It's up high, it's not very low to the ground. And then something interesting about this car, see, Volvo doesn't update their models every 3 and 4 years like big manufacturers do. They still have fog lights, something is slowly disappearing from the automotive industry. Then we wrap around the side and we look at the profile of the hood. There's really not much going on. There's 2 lines, and that's it. That's the simplistic design that makes this kind of have a classy, good look. Then we go to the side and we have the plastic cladding, which is not even painted. It doesn't look very good. They're trying to go for like this muscular off-roady thing. It doesn't really look good in my opinion. I would have much rather this be body color. This bottom looks like aluminum. It's not really aluminum. Looks very nice, looks very classy, and it says Cross Country on it in the back. Something very interesting about this car though, see, even some luxury cars, you can lock, like when you have one of those smart keys where keyless ignition and whatnot, you can lock the doors in the front, but you can't do that in the back. But in the Volvo V60, you can actually do it in the back. That is a nice touch. So all 4 doors, you can lock the doors from. That is pretty nice. Then we look at the shape of the wagon. It's a classic look of a Volvo. It's a little bit more rounded than the older wagons that we all remember, but it is a very classy look. It's not over the top. I really like how this car looks on the outside. And same thing in the back. You have this kind of curve here that is a very iconic Volvo look. This car looks very good, folks, on the outside. There's no denying that. And then we have Cross Country one more time here in case you forgot from the sides. And then there is this, the B5 all-wheel drive. Doesn't that remind you of Audi? Because it does to me. It almost looks like it's a direct badge from Audi, even the font and the little all-wheel drive thing, but that's okay. Sweden and Germany, they're neighbors. Then we look at the back, and it's a power-operated back door. You do have plenty of space here, with one thing notable. So you have a tonneau cover, which is very cheap and flimsy feeling, by the way. Once you get it to lock, this is one position of this tonneau cover, standard. But then there is a second position, which goes up so you can load stuff and then bring this back down and lock it. I thought that was a pretty cool thing. It's a very simple thing. They have a little track here, which just the tonneau cover slides on, this little track, and that's it. Pretty simple thing, but it is pretty nice that they thought of that. I just hope they would have thought to make this a little bit less flimsy. Then we have this giant cover, which reveals one of my favorite things in cars. It's a spare tire. You rarely see spare tires in new cars anymore. Well, here's a big spare tire with the 48-volt battery directly underneath it. Let's take this and see. It's actually a tiny little battery. So when you remove the spare tire, you have 48-volt battery right here. It's probably one of the smallest ones I've seen in the 48-volt cars that we've reviewed, but it is nonetheless here. But then there is a few things that are interesting here. So the 12-volt battery lives somewhere in this area, and then I have these 2 little wires that just go to it. I wish they would have hidden that wire a little bit better, but they didn't. And then you have this little hook that holds this cover, which is pretty well made, this cover, I have to say that. And then you have this little, very last minute thought, Velcro to hang it here, and it closes. Pretty spacious, but there's no third row. I don't think it would be possible for a third row in a wagon. And then one more thing, and this is something the entire automotive industry is doing these days. These shocks, they actually have a motor inside of them, and that's how this door kind of opens and closes with power. And they have 2 buttons here. One of them closes the hatch. Second one closes the hatch and locks the doors. This is very cool, very useful. I wish every single car has that. Let's talk about the interior of the V60. And things here initially, the initial impressions, this is a very nice interior. But then the more time you spend with it, you start noticing things that are not very nice. Let's start with the first thing. The leather seats. So this is the fully optioned one, the $63,000 one with Napa leather seats. This is a very beautiful leather on the seats. I mean, it's soft. It is just every bit as much of a $63,000 car interior. But it's only on the seats and not even the entire seat. The center console, very cheap feeling vinyl. The armrest here on the door and the door panel, everything feels very cheap. That's the problem. And the second thing is the wood grain is extremely nice. I mean, it has texture. It feels just very nice. And the grain and everything, it looks very nice. But then the plastics around it and everything, look, plastic usually in cars don't feel right, and that's just the way it is. But there is nicer plastic that feels like it's gonna hold. And then there's really cheap, flimsy plastic. This one gets the cheap, flimsy plastic. That's the problem. Then we look at the center stack where you have the big screen with an interesting orientation. Looks like a giant iPad. It is a very strange screen. Does take some time getting used to. It can be intuitive. This car also has an air purifier that tells you the air quality inside on that big screen. But then underneath the big screen, you have a volume knob, play, skip, whatnot, some controls for the HVAC. All the rest of the controls are in the screen. And then, interestingly, in the XC90 that we reviewed a few weeks ago, the last button here was to open the glove box. In this one, you have that button, but it's blank, and the glove box is manual. I guess they didn't bother to, they just wanted the same switch panel to be used in all their cars. Then we move to the gauge, which is all screen. The gauge does absolutely nothing other than display the map, which is very nice, and even the odometer is kind of a hidden thing. You press this button on the steering wheel to show you the odometer, then it disappears. Took me a minute to figure that out. That was pretty interesting. And then the overall fit and finish here is not very good. It's something surprising with Volvo. Usually they've had good fit and finish. This one, not so much. On top of the materials, they are a little bit on the lower end of things. The fit and finish is not great. And then the center console area here. So Volvo loves to put their start button here, right, which is a very strange location. Does take a minute to get used to. I suppose once you get used to it, it's fine. And then right in the center, the shifter. I like this shifter. First, it is a simple orientation with a button for the park, but then the crystal that says the town where the crystal comes from, it is something very nice. It is lit at night. Looks very classy and very nice. And then the other interesting touch, on the passenger seat, you have a little tag with a Swedish flag. It is a reminder that this is a strange Swedish car owned by a Chinese company. Very interesting mix. But then more on the strange and kind of lower end feeling things. The steering wheel leather just doesn't feel like a car of this price range. It just feels very generic, cheap leather. And then the buttons here are very strange orientation. Anything here on this side of the steering wheel, it's all cruise control stuff. But here, up and down arrow is the volume, and then skip the track or next is very labeled clearly, but the up and down arrow is the volume. There's absolutely no mention of it here, but you just kind of find that out as you go. Let's talk about the back seat of the V60. I am 5'7". This is my driving position. I have plenty of headroom, plenty of knee room. But something very interesting about this back seat, and I'm starting to see this in a lot more newer cars. You sit straight. There's a giant space between your knee, your inner thigh, and then the seat. Because the seat sits so low on these things. I don't know why a lot of cars are turning like this. This would be a very uncomfortable position for many people. Your ankles will start getting tired after a while. So long trips in this car for adults in the back will be a problem. And then the giant transmission tunnel, even though this is a front-wheel drive biased car, is kind of strange. But what is more strange here is in the front, you barely have any airflow. Again, we'll talk about that in a bit. And here you have two vents here, one vent here, one vent on the other pillar. There's a lot of AC vents for the back, I guess, to make up for you being uncomfortable. Little screen here to control the rear AC. And then the materials. These seats are extremely nice. Very nice Napa leather. But then if you put the center console down, this is very nice Napa leather. This is not very, this is very cheap generic leather. Same thing with the back of the headrest. And then the back of the seat is all plastic. So if you opt for the higher option to get the Napa leather, you barely get it. Just barely on the seats, not anything other than the seats, like center console, for example. I don't know why they did that. It just feels not at the stature of the cost of this car. And then something else that I noticed, just the fit and finish and quality of everything. Like this grab handle, when I pull it, the whole headliner starts to flex. It doesn't feel like very high quality. Let's talk about some things I do not like about the V60, starting with the AC system. So let's first talk about the 48-volt integration of things. Using a belt-driven compressor in a configuration like this that is meant for an extended off time when you stop for the start-stop event, I mean, it is immediate. The fan drops in speed and then the AC turns hot or muggy very quickly. And it's like they could have done this a little bit better, perhaps a bigger evaporator, a higher capacity AC system where it can continuously give cold air when you have a start-stop event, but that's not the case here. But what's even worse, when it is working, the airflow out of the vents is very strange. You put the fan at the maximum speed, you hear the fan, it's very loud, but the airflow is not good. I have never seen a car that has this little airflow. And then the other thing about the 48 volt system, actually the whole thing, it is just okay. Simply because this is not really a full 48 volt system. It just starts, boosts a little bit, but it doesn't have an EV drive mode. Some 48 volt systems will have that. This one doesn't have that, which should make the system immediate. I mean, it is a torque converter transmission. When you're driving normally, it's just okay. But if you all of a sudden need to accelerate a little faster, like you're merging into a highway or you're merging into a main street and you accelerate, there is a significant delay that is noticeable, and it's kind of unexplainable because this has a torque converter transmission, should be immediate. It is not. And the other thing is, this whole 48 volt system absolutely makes no sense. It doesn't really add anything. Gas mileage is still not very impressive. Power levels, they are good for a 4-cylinder, but still, this 48 volt system adds so much complications and adds so much in maintenance and repairs, and it adds nothing of value to the car. I wish this was just a normal 4-cylinder. It would have been a lot better without this whole complication. And the other thing is the fit and finish. It was kind of a surprise. Usually Volvo, they are good about their fit and finish. Everything feels solid, everything feels good. But this one has obvious things that are not sitting right, things that are not lining up. The fit and finish feels very rushed. And then the materials on the inside, like we talked about, the seats are very nice leather, but the rest of the stuff just doesn't feel like a car of this price range. So should you buy the V60 wagon in 2023? Folks, this is a really good looking car. It has a lot of good things about it, but at the same time, the price range where it's at is what works against it. Because at this price range, you are deep into very good SUV territory, especially in today's market where everybody wants an SUV. I mean, you're into the territory of fully loaded, non-luxury ones with really nice options, or even into the beginnings of the luxury ones and the really good ones, the reliable ones, the ones that are made for families. That's the first thing against this one. And the second thing is the execution here could be a lot better. First, the lackluster AC performance and that 48 volt system and the just mega complication of things. You open the hood, you look at this engine, it's a 4-cylinder engine. It's mega complicated and it doesn't really achieve striking numbers. It's not really an engine that is going to be remembered in the future. And you look at the fit and finish. Usually Volvo, even with their acquisitions, some say it's a Chinese owners, whatnot, but Volvo usually had historically a good fit and finish. But this one, I see a lot of issues with fit and finish, the basic stuff. And that works against this one as well. But if you must have a wagon, I will advise you to spend a little bit more time with this car, because the initial impression on this car, it looks really good. The interior feels special initially, but the more time you spend with it, you start seeing the drawbacks to it. So I hope this video helps you make a better decision. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.